Welcome to this story. Have you ever felt completely alone, as if the world has forgotten you? In a small town where whispers carry the weight of shame, one young woman's fragile plea, "My room only has one bed," sparks a life-altering journey. Join us as we unravel the poignant story of Flora, a girl burdened by her family's past, and discover how an unexpected encounter with an Apache man could rewrite her fate forever. Will she find the courage to embrace her true self, or will the shadows of her past keep her trapped in solitude? Stay tuned to witness a tale of resilience, redemption, and the power of connection. The bus station lights were the kind of harsh neon that made everything look worse than it really was. The vending machine buzzed, a stray dog barked somewhere in the distance, and the desert night pressed in like a heavy blanket. She checked her phone for the 100th time. No signal, of course. The last bus had rolled out 2 hours ago, leaving nothing but silence and a stretch of road that disappeared into the dark. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this forgotten town, not in this hour. But fate has a funny way of leading you where you never planned to go. Air was sharp with the smell of dust and gasoline when she heard the scrape of boots against gravel. Her head snapped up, and that's when she saw him. He wasn't like anyone else who'd passed through that bus stop. Tall, broad shoulders that carried the kind of strength you can't buy in a gym. His long black hair caught the faint glow of the street lamp, framing a face that looked carved from stone strong, unreadable, but alive with something that pulled her in. His eyes storm gray, sharp but tired, locked on hers. Not like a stranger's glance. More like recognition. "Bus left already," he said, voice low, calm. She swallowed. "Yeah, I noticed." He studied her for a second longer, and she couldn't help but wonder if she looked as lost as she felt. Her friends had warned her about traveling alone. About the roads out here, long, empty, stretching through desert and mountains where people could vanish without a trace. But she had laughed it off. She thought she could handle it, and yet here she was. Alone, stranded, a suitcase at her feet and no plan. He stepped closer, slow, careful, like he knew sudden movements might send her bolting. The street lamp flickered, throwing half his face in shadow. "You don't want to wait here all night," he said. Not a question. A statement. "Yeah?" She shot back, forcing strength into her voice. "Got a better idea?" The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something that hinted at one. Maybe she should have walked away. Everything about this screamed don't trust him. A stranger. A deserted town. Midnight in the middle of nowhere. Her mom's voice echoed in her head. "Don't you dare take rides from strange men." And yet there was something in his eyes. Not menace. Not hunger. Something else. Something quieter. A weight she couldn't name. Her heart thudded in her chest as silence stretched between them. The kind of silence that dares you to break it. Finally, he said, "Name's Kai." His voice was steady, like he wasn't in a rush for her to answer. She hesitated, then, against every rule she'd ever been taught, whispered back, "Emma." Her own name felt fragile in her mouth. "Emma," he repeated, like he was testing the sound of it. And in that moment, under the humming light of a dying street lamp, she felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. But then the wind shifted. Cold, sharp, carrying the smell of an oncoming storm. She hugged her jacket tighter, realizing just how alone she really was. "You'll freeze out here," Kai said. He tilted his head toward the darkness stretching beyond the station. "There's a place." "Not far," her stomach nodded. Every instinct screamed don't. Every headline she'd ever read flashed through her mind, missing women. Unsolved cases, bad endings. But there was also this: if she stayed, she was stuck. If she followed, at least she was moving. And something about his voice, the steady calm, the way he didn't push, made her believe he wasn't offering danger. He was offering escape, Her breath shook as she glanced down at her bag, then back at him. "Where?" she asked. Kai didn't answer right away. He just held her gaze unblinking as thunder rumbled in the far distance. Finally, he said, "You'll see." And in that single moment, Emma realized her night wasn't just about missing a bus anymore. This was the start of something else. Something bigger. Something that would change everything. The streets were nearly empty when Emma followed Kai out of the bus station. A flickering street lamp buzzed overhead, the only sound aside from the crunch of gravel beneath their steps. Everywhere she looked, neon motel signs screened the same two words: nitrogen monoxide vacancy. She couldn't believe it. It wasn't a holiday, wasn't summer break, wasn't anything that would fill up every room in town. But there it was. Every door closed. Her suitcase felt heavier with each block. The desert air cut through her thin jacket, colder than she ever expected. The night wasn't just dark, it felt alive, like it was pressing in on her, whispering she didn't belong here. Kai walked a half step ahead, silent, steady. Not once did he glance back to see if she was still following. And that somehow made her trust him more. Still, her mind raced with every warning her mom had ever given her. Bad things happen to girls who follow strangers at night. Don't you dare. Her phone had no service. No Uber, no Lyft, no calling for backup. Just her and a man she'd met less than 10 minutes ago. And yet, she hadn't turned away. Finally, they reached the last motel on the strip, a faded sign that once read Desert Rose Inn. The R and O were burned out, leaving only Dessert Say Inn glowing weakly. Emma tugged her bag behind her, every muscle in her body hoping for a miracle. But the clerk didn't even look up when he shook his head. Full, she almost laughed. "Of course, that's it then," she muttered, pressing a hand against her forehead. Her breath fogged in the cold. She wanted to scream, cry, do anything but stand there feeling helpless. Kai leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, like he'd expected this all along. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Told you. You don't want to wait out here all night." Emma snapped her head toward him. "So what? You just happen to know where I can sleep?" That doesn't sound sketchy at all. The corner of his mouth curved, not quite a smile. Sketchy staying out here, hoping someone kind shows up. Trust me, they won't. She hated that he was right. The town was dead quiet. Not a single car passed, not a soul walked by. Just shadows stretching long across cracked pavement. Her stomach twisted. She wanted to argue, to tell him thanks but no thanks, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, she didn't have options. Kai finally pushed off the wall and met her eyes. His storm gray gaze held hers like he could see straight through the mask she wore. "There's a cabin," he said. "Mine." Emma's pulse jumped. "Yours?" "Yeah, you live here?" A pause. "Sometimes." That didn't make her feel better. "What makes you think I'd be stupid enough to follow you there?" She shot back, her voice trembling more than she wanted. His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought she'd gone too far. But then he said, quietly, "Because you're smart enough to know what happens if you stay." The way he said it, it wasn't a threat. It was a fact. A truth she didn't want to face. She glanced around. Empty streets. Locked motel doors. Her suitcase wheels catching on cracks in the sidewalk. And above it all, thunder rolled again, closer this time. The storm was coming fast. Her breath came in shallow bursts. Every bone in her body screamed no. But something deeper, something primal, whispered go. Kai didn't move closer, didn't push. He simply stood there, waiting, patient, like a man who knew she'd already made her choice, even if she hadn't admitted it yet. And maybe that was the scariest part of all. Emma hugged her jacket tighter, her voice barely a whisper. "Show me." For the first time, his eyes softened. He gave a single nod, then turned toward the dark stretch of road that led out of town. Her suitcase wheels rattled behind her, every sound amplified in the empty night. With each step, the motel lights faded until there was nothing but shadows, desert wind, and the stranger she couldn't seem to walk away from. She didn't know where he was taking her. She didn't know if she was walking toward safety or straight into danger, but one thing was certain that there was no turning back now. The farther they walked, the more the town fell away behind them until it felt like Emma was stepping out of one world and into another. Street lamps disappeared. Neon motel signs vanished. All that was left was the crunch of gravel beneath her suitcase wheels and the low whistle of desert wind wrapping around her shoulders. Kai didn't speak much. His strides were long and steady, like he'd made this walk 1,000 times before. Emma had to hurry just to keep up, the cold biting sharper with every step. "Where exactly are we going?" she finally asked, trying to mask the nerves tightening her throat. "Cabin," he said simply. "Yeah, you mentioned that," she shot back. "But whose cabin?" A pause. "Mine? Sort of? Sort of?" That did nothing to calm the pounding in her chest. They walked another half-mile before she saw it. A shadow against the horizon, tucked at the edge of the desert where the land rose into jagged rock. It wasn't much wooden walls weathered by storms, a roof patched in places, one lantern glowing faintly in the window. It looked forgotten, like a place that shouldn't exist, and yet here it was, waiting. Kai pushed the door open, and the faint scent of cedar smoke drifted out, mixed with something wilder sage, maybe, or earth after rain. Emma hesitated at the threshold, her hand gripping the handle of her suitcase so tight her knuckles went white. "You coming in?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. She swallowed hard, then stepped inside. The cabin was small, one open room with a low fire crackling in the stone hearth. Shadows danced along the walls, painting the space in warm light. It was rustic, no TV, no clutter, just rough-hewn wood and the essentials. Her gaze swept the room, and that's when she froze. The bed. One bed. Just big enough for two? Covered in a quilt that looked handmade. Her heart skipped, heat rushing to her face despite the chill still clinging to her. She tried to play it off, whispering almost to herself, "My room only has one bed." But Kai heard. He set down the lantern and turned, his expression unreadable. "I'll take the floor," Emma blinked. She hadn't expected him to address it so directly. "You don't have to," she started, but he cut her off with a shake of his head. "The floor's fine." She looked down at the cabin floorboards, rough and cold, and pictured him stretched out there while she curled under the quilt. Guilt twisted in her stomach. "Do you always bring strangers here?" she asked, trying to break the tension. His eyes flicked to hers, sharp but steady. No, that single word carried more weight than an entire story. And for some reason, it eased her. She set her suitcase against the wall, her hands trembling more than she wanted to admit. Outside, the storm was breaking. The wind howled, rattling the shutters, rain beginning to lash against the roof. Kai crouched near the hearth, tossing another log onto the fire. Sparks flared, and for the first time, she noticed the tattoos peeking from under the sleeve of his shirt, black ink patterns winding over skin, symbols she didn't recognize. She wanted to ask about them. She wanted to ask 100 things. But the words stuck. Instead, she stood there, hugging her jacket around her, watching him. For a long time, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the crack of firewood and the storm outside. It wasn't awkward silence. It was heavy, thick with things unspoken. Finally, Kai stood, dusting off his hands. "Get some rest." "You'll need it," Emma hesitated. "Rest? In a stranger's cabin? On a bed with only inches between them?" Her body screamed for sleep, but her mind was wide awake still. She moved toward the bed, each step louder than it should have been. She sat down, the quilt soft against her palms. Kai unrolled a blanket and set it on the floor without complaint. His movements were careful, deliberate, like a man used to being on guard. Emma lay back against the pillow, eyes tracing the ceiling beams as thunder cracked overhead. The storm was closing in, fierce and wild. She turned her head slightly. In the flickering firelight, she could see him broad shoulders, long hair spilling loose, eyes closed but body tense, like he could spring up at any moment. Safe, dangerous, stranger, protector. She didn't know what he was to her yet, but she knew one thing for certain. This night wasn't going to end the way she expected. The storm outside had teeth. Rain hammered the roof in relentless sheets. Thunder rolled across the desert like a drumbeat, and wind rattled the old shutters until it sounded like the cabin itself might tear apart. Emma lay stiff on the bed, staring at the ceiling, every crack of thunder making her jump. The quilt was warm, but her skin prickled with awareness of the storm, of the cabin, of the man lying only a few feet away. Kai was on the floor, stretched out on his blanket. From where she lay, she could see the rise and fall of his chest, the curve of his shoulders, the way he kept one arm tucked behind his head as if sleep came easy to him. But she knew better. Even with his eyes closed, his body looked coiled, alert, like a soldier waiting for an order, like a man who never really let his guard down. Emma bit her lip, rolling onto her side to face him. The firelight flickered, casting him in shadow and gold. "Are you actually comfortable down there?" she asked, her voice small, almost drowned out by the storm. One of his eyes opened, gray and piercing even in the dim light. "I've slept worse." That wasn't the answer she wanted. "You don't have to prove anything," she said quickly. "It's freezing." "You're not exactly going to get rest on hardwood." His gaze held hers for a moment, steady and unreadable, before he closed his eyes again. "You'll rest easier if I stay down here." The words hit her like a punch. He wasn't saying it for himself, he was saying it for her. To make her feel safe. To draw a line neither of them would cross. But the line itself burned between them. She lay back against the pillow, pulling the quilt to her chin, but the tension didn't ease. If anything, it thickened, filling the room heavier than the smoke from the fire. The storm cracked again, lightning slicing through the window for an instant. Emma flinched, her breath catching. Kai's voice came low, rough. "Scared of storms?" "No," she lied, too fast. "Just startled me." A faint sound came from him, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "You don't have to lie." The words cut deep, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it quiet, certain, like he knew exactly what she was hiding. And maybe not just about storms. She turned toward him again. "What about you? You're not scared of anything?" His eyes opened slowly. This time, he didn't look away. "Plenty of things," her breath hitched. She hadn't expected him to admit that. "Like what?" For a second, he didn't answer. The storm filled the silence, rain hammering harder, thunder growling overhead. Finally, he said, "Losing people. Failing them." The honesty in his tone cut through her like glass. He didn't owe her that truth. He barely knew her. And yet here he was, handing her a piece of himself in the middle of the storm. Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to say something back, something real. But what could she offer him? That she was tired of being invisible? That she'd run from a life where no one noticed if she was gone? The words stuck, heavy on her tongue. Instead, she whispered, "I don't think you'd fail anyone." His gaze softened, just for a breath, then shifted toward the fire. "You don't know me." "No," she admitted. "But I want to." The storm raged, shaking the cabin walls. But the silence that followed between them was louder than thunder. Emma's heart raced. She didn't know if it was the danger outside, or the closeness inside, but she felt this pull between them. This thread that had appeared out of nowhere and now refused to let go. She shifted under the quilt, her voice barely audible. "Kai." He turned his head toward her, waiting. Her breath trembled as she whispered, "You don't have to stay on the floor." The words hung in the air like lightning before it. Strikes. Kai didn't move right away. He just watched her, gray eyes searching hers for something: fear, trust, hesitation. And then the fire cracked. Thunder shook the cabin, and his answer came, low and steady. "Are you sure?" Emma's pulse roared in her ears. She didn't know if it was recklessness, loneliness, or fate guiding her lips, but she nodded. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, the air shifted, heavy with something more dangerous than thunder. And in that fragile, suspended moment, Emma knew the night had only just begun. The storm was merciless now. Rain pounded the roof like fists, and the wind screamed through the cracks in the cabin walls. It sounded less like weather and more like war, a relentless drumbeat that rattled. Emma's bones. Kai sat at the edge of the bed, close enough that she could feel his presence in the space between them. Not touching, not speaking. Just there. Solid. She pulled the quilt tighter, heart hammering louder than the thunder. The silence stretched until she couldn't take it anymore. "Do you always live like this?" she asked softly. "Alone, out here." Kai's jaw flexed. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the fire. "It's easier," he said finally. "Easier than what?" He hesitated. The storm filled the pause, lightning flashing through the window. His face was carved in shadow and light, unreadable. "Easier than remembering," he murmured. Emma's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. "What is it you don't want to remember?" She pressed, her voice barely audible over the storm. Kai's hands curled into fists, the tendons straining. He drew in a slow breath, like he was fighting something inside him. "I fought battles I didn't win," he said, his voice low, rough. "Lost people I couldn't save." The fire popped, sending sparks upward. Emma stared at him, her chest tightening. There was something in his words: grief, anger, maybe even guilt, that made her own loneliness feel small. She leaned forward, her hand brushing the quilt. "You mean in the military?" His gray eyes flicked to hers, sharp, unflinching. "Something like that." It wasn't a denial. But it wasn't the whole truth either. Emma swallowed, trying to read the shadows in his face. "And that's why you're out here? Hiding in the desert?" "I'm not hiding." His voice snapped sharper than thunder. Then, softer. "I'm surviving." The storm slammed against the cabin, rattling the shutters like they might rip free. Emma flinched, her hand flying to the edge of the quilt. Kai's eyes caught the movement. For a moment, his expression softened. "You're safe here," he said. Not as reassurance. As a promise. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But something in his eyes told her there were things even he couldn't control. "Safe," she repeated under her breath, tasting the word. "You don't seem like a man who believes in that." He let out a dry sound, halfway to a laugh but heavy with bitterness. "Safe is an illusion. You don't get to keep it. You just borrow it until it's gone." The weight of his words hung in the air, heavier than the storm. Emma's throat tightened. She thought about the life she'd left behind, the job she hated, the friends who forgot her texts, the silence in her apartment. She had always told herself she was strong, independent, untouchable. But sitting here, with the storm raging and this stranger spilling pieces of himself like shards of glass, she realized how fragile she really was. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Then why did you help me?" For the first time, Kai turned fully toward her. His gray eyes locked onto hers, and she felt like the world had narrowed to that one gaze. "Because I know what it's like," he said quietly. "To be left in the dark. To have nowhere to go, Emma's breath trembled. She hadn't expected honesty. Not like this. Not from a man who wore silence like armor. Lightning split the sky outside, flooding the cabin in white for a heartbeat. In that flash she saw it, the rawness in his eyes, the weight of secrets he hadn't spoken, and just as quickly it was gone, swallowed by shadow. She wanted to ask more. She wanted to peel back every layer he'd wrapped around himself. But the storm was growing worse, the cabin shuddering under its force, and a strange feeling prickled through her, a sense that the storm wasn't just weather. It was something else. A mirror of the battle inside him. Kai shifted back toward the fire, jaw tight again, shutting himself off. Emma lay there, staring at his silhouette in the flickering light, her heart aching with questions she wasn't sure she was ready to hear the answers to. The storm roared, and she whispered into the darkness, not sure if he heard, "What are you really running from?" Kai didn't move, didn't answer, but the way his shoulders tensed told her one thing for certain: whatever it was, it hadn't stopped chasing him. The storm had reached its peak. Lightning split the desert sky again and again, each flash spilling white fire through the cabin windows. The thunder didn't just rumble, it shook the ground, rattled her bones, made her heart race faster than it already was. Emma lay frozen on the bed, quilt pulled to her chest, eyes on the man sitting inches away. Kai hadn't moved for what felt like hours. His body was still, but tense, like a predator who never let his guard down. Firelight carved sharp edges into his face, but his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, burned softer, weighed down by memories he wouldn't let free. Emma's fingers twitched under the quilt. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the small space between them, but fear locked her in place. Fear of him. Fear of herself. Another crash of thunder. She flinched, her breath catching. Kai turned his head at the sound, studying her with that same unreadable calm. "Storm scaring you again," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Not the storm," he stilled. And in the silence that followed, Emma realized the truth of her own words. It wasn't the storm outside. It was the storm inside her, the ache of being seen, the pull she couldn't explain. Her chest rose and fell, shaky. The room smelled of cedar smoke, rain, and something else, something warm, grounding. His presence filling the cabin like a shield. She whispered, almost to herself, "You don't know how long it's been since I felt safe." Kai's gaze locked on hers. For a heartbeat, the world stopped, the thunder, the rain, the fire, everything muted under the weight of that admission. Without thinking, Emma slid her hand from under the quilt. Slowly, cautiously, she reached across the small gap between them. Her fingertips brushed the back of his hand, rough and warm against her skin. The touch was nothing, a whisper, but it felt like everything. Kai didn't move at first. His hand was stone beneath hers, unyielding. But then slowly, like a tide he couldn't stop, his fingers curled, lacing through hers. The spark that shot through her chest was instant, fierce, terrifying. Her breath hitched. "Kai." He closed his eyes for a moment, jaw clenched like the contact hurt more than it soothed. "You don't know what you're doing." "Maybe not," she whispered back, gripping his hand tighter. "But maybe you don't either." Lightning blazed again, throwing them both in stark light. And in that moment, she saw it all, the cracks in his armor. The grief etched into him, and beneath it, a loneliness so deep it mirrored her own. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved away. The storm roared, but inside the cabin, the silence was heavier, charged, alive with something neither could name. Emma leaned closer, her pulse racing. "You said safe doesn't last." "Maybe it doesn't, but right now, it feels real." His eyes opened, locking on hers. For once, they weren't guarded. They weren't storm-gray stone. They were vulnerable, human. Kai's hand squeezed hers gently, grounding her as another crack of thunder shook the walls. "You don't understand," he murmured, voice rough, almost broken. "People around me, they don't stay." Emma's throat tightened. Her other hand lifted, trembling, and brushed his arm. "Then maybe I'm not like the others." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. But they felt true, more true than anything she'd said in years. Kai's breath came heavier now, his shoulders tense. His eyes locked on her like he was fighting every instinct inside him. The storm rattled the cabin, lightning flaring so bright it turned night into day. And still, neither of them let go. Emma's voice was barely audible when she whispered, "Fate doesn't ask permission, Kai. It just happens." His lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. Instead, he exhaled slow, long, resigned, and in that breath, Emma knew something between them had shifted, something that couldn't be undone. The storm showed no mercy. Rain lashed against the cabin walls, thunder cracked like the sky was splitting in two, and wind howled through the desert night. But inside, everything had gone still. Emma's hand was still in Kai's. It should have felt small, fragile, out of place in his rough grip. But instead, it felt right, like her hand had always been meant to fit their dot. She should have let go. She should have rolled over, closed her eyes, and pretended she was asleep until the storm passed. But she didn't. She couldn't, because for the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about tomorrow or yesterday or all the mistakes in between. She was here. With him. Kai sat rigid, like holding her hand cost him more than battle ever had. His gaze was locked on the fire, but Emma could see the muscle in his jaw working, like he was fighting himself. "You should rest," he murmured finally, his voice low, rough. Emma shook her head, her hair brushing the pillow. "Can't." He turned then, meeting her eyes. The firelight flickered across his face, carving shadows that made him look both dangerous and unbearably human. "Why not?" he asked. "Because every time I close my eyes," she whispered, "I wonder if I'll wake up tomorrow and realize this was all a mistake. That I should have stayed at that bus stop. That I should have kept my guard up." Her throat tightened and she forced the next words out. "But I don't want to feel like that right now. I don't want to keep running from every moment that might actually mean something." Kai's eyes softened, just barely, but his grip on her hand stayed firm. "You don't know me, Emma," he said, voice like gravel. "If you did, you wouldn't be saying this." She leaned closer, pulse racing so fast she thought he could hear it. "Then tell me. Show me. Don't keep hiding from me like I'm a stranger who wandered too far." For a long moment, the only sound was the storm, the thunder, the crackle of fire. Then Kai shifted, closing the distance between them. His forehead almost touched hers, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath. "I can't give you what you think you're looking for," he whispered. "My past. It doesn't leave room for futures." Emma's chest ached, but her voice came steady. "I'm not asking for forever. I'm asking for tonight." That broke him. She saw it, the flicker in his eyes, the wall he'd built crumbling just enough for something else to seep through. His hand released hers only to trace the side of her face, calloused fingers brushing her cheek like he was afraid she might vanish if he touched too hard. The storm outside roared, lightning blazing so bright it painted the cabin white. And then, with no words left between them, he closed the space. The first kiss was tentative, restrained, as though he was testing a boundary he had no right to cross. But when Emma leaned into him, when her fingers curled into his shirt like she'd been waiting her whole life for this, restraint shattered. Every touch after that carried the weight of everything they hadn't said, his grief, her loneliness, the unspoken truth that this moment wasn't about desire alone. It was about survival. About finding something worth holding on to in a world that took too much. They moved together slowly, cautiously at first, like neither wanted to break the fragile thread binding them. But as the storm raged, their breaths found rhythm. Their hands learned paths, and every barrier that had stood between them fell away. For hours, the storm outside waged its war. But inside, another storm raged softer, deeper, but just as unstoppable. When at last the thunder began to fade, Emma lay against him, her head on his chest, listening to the steady thud of his heartbeat, strong, unyielding, a sound she never wanted to forget. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. She knew the world outside hadn't changed. The roads were still empty, the night still dangerous, the future still uncertain. But in that cabin, in that one night, everything inside her had shifted. She wasn't lost anymore. She wasn't running. She was exactly where she was meant to be. And whether it lasted a night or a lifetime, Emma knew one thing for sure. This night had changed her fate forever. When Emma opened her eyes, the storm was gone. The cabin was quiet, bathed in a faint gold glow spilling through the cracks in the shutters. Outside, the desert was waking cactus flowers slick with rain. Sand darkened and rich, the air carrying that sharp, clean scent that only comes after a storm. For a moment, she didn't move. She just lay there, her head resting on Kai's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was slow, strong, unshakable, so unlike the chaos of the night before. She could have stayed like that forever. But the truth pressed in as heavy as the silence. The storm was over, and morning didn't care about stolen nights. Morning was about choices. Emma shifted slightly, looking up at him. Kai's eyes were already open. He hadn't been sleeping. He was watching her, quiet, as if memorizing her face in the morning light. "You've been awake?" she whispered. He nodded once. His gray eyes were softer now, but they carried something else to await. A question. Emma tried to smile, though her throat tightened. "You're not exactly a guy who looks peaceful in the morning." That earned her the smallest curve of his lips. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. "What?" she asked, pushing herself up on one elbow. "What's going through your head?" He didn't answer right away. He sat up slowly, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His back was to her now, the early light catching on the ink that wound across his shoulders. Finally, his voice came low, steady. "You weren't meant to leave this town the same." Emma's chest squeezed. "What does that even mean?" Kai turned then, meeting her gaze. His expression was unreadable, but his words cut through her like glass. "Fate doesn't give second chances. It gives crossroads. Last night, that was yours," her breath caught. She didn't know if he meant last night was a gift or a warning. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You don't have to." "Not yet." He stood, pulling on his boots, every movement purposeful, like a man preparing for something bigger than himself. Emma rose from the bed, her bare feet brushing the rough wooden floor. "Don't do that. Don't shut me out now." His jaw flexed, but his voice stayed calm. "Emma, the world you left behind? It was already done with you. The one you've stepped into now, it's not gentle. It won't wait for you to decide." Her pulse raced. "Then what do you want me to do?" Kai walked to the window, pushing open the shutter. Sunlight flooded the cabin, painting him in gold and shadow. He looked out across the desert, endless and alive after the storm. "Stay," he said finally. The word hit her like lightning. "Stay." It was simple, but it carried everything: risk, change, the unknown. Emma's throat ached, her eyes stinging. She thought of her old life, the bus she'd missed, the empty apartment waiting back in the city. She thought of how she'd felt standing under that buzzing street lamp, lost and unseen. And then she thought of this, of Kai's hand in hers, of the storm, of the fire that had burned between them like it had been waiting forever to be lit. She stepped toward him, her voice trembling but sure. "If I stay, what happens?" Kai turned from the window, his gray eyes locking on hers. There was no smile, no reassurance, only truth. "Then your fate won't belong to the life you left," he said. "It'll belong to the one we build." Emma's breath caught. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even safe. But for the first time in her life, it felt real. The sun broke fully over the desert horizon, flooding the cabin with light. Emma stood there, facing him, her suitcase still against the wall, her heart pounding like a drum. And in that golden dawn she knew she wasn't leaving. Her fate had already changed.